Welcome to all of you who've joined us from wherever you are on the planet for this very special Global Minnesota Global Conversation, where we'll be talking tonight about a subject that you've heard about from Global Minnesota a number of times, the World Expo, World Expositions. Minnesota's had a long and distinguished history of involvement, and we're helping out in some of the aspects of expos taking place right this moment or just concluded. And we are helping support Minnesota's bid to host a specialized expo in the coming years, hopefully the summer of 2027. My name is Mark Ritchie, and I have the honor of serving as president of Global Minnesota. I want to thank all of our members and our supporters, our corporations, foundations, and others. It's your contributions and your memberships that help make these kinds of programs and all of the things that we do throughout the year to connect Minnesotans to the world and the world to Minnesota possible. These programs are offered free of charge to the public, and thanks to the magic of Zoom and digital virtual media, we're able to offer them worldwide and to every corner of our state and every corner of our nation. So thank you again for your support. Expos have a long history, a very storied and very wild, interesting history here in Minnesota. Some of you know that the first of large scale, really the one that's called the beginning of the World Expo movement, was 1851 in London. They built a big crystal palace, which is still a world-class design museum in London. In 1851, 1852, this movement was founded. The world's second World's Exposition was in New York, in Manhattan, where they built another crystal palace. And the Minnesota Territorial Legislature, so this was before we were even a state, allocated $300, which was good money in those days. And a gentleman, last name Leduc, bought and brought with him a buffalo, a birch bark canoe, and lots of different kind of grain and wild rice and other things that represented our state. And he went out to New York and actually was the only state outside of the New York region that had a display, and it was a spectacular display. It was a display that caught the attention of Horace Greeley, who at that point wasn't sure about Minnesota. He, in fact, said once, well, you can't grow apples in Minnesota, an ironic statement in this modern era. But in any case, he ended up being very impressed, praising Minnesota's exhibit in books and articles in his newspapers, and ultimately saying, go west, young man. But over the years, Minnesota has also been very active in bringing new information and supporting the development of thinking about expos, both the US participation overseas, the hope that we will be able to begin hosting them again in the United States. And tonight we're going to hear from three very special people who've been contributing to that broader process. You hear a lot about the expo in Minnesota because we're bidding to host one, and we have been for 10 years now. But in this period, there's also a rebirth of the movement. And we're going to start our evening with a presentation by Dr. Anna Kaplan, who's a scholar, an oral historian in Washington, D.C., and her work has been focused on gathering oral histories about civic engagement and civic participation in expos, both in the United States and overseas. He has a very special report that's co-published by our good partners, Global Ties and the Humanities, the National Endowment of Humanities, Experiencing Expos, an Oral History of U.S. Citizens' Engagements with World's Fairs, 1962 to 2017. Dr. Kaplan, thank you so much for joining us today, and please let us hear how this oral history and the things that you've learned and that we need to know about in our own path, trying to bring an expo back to the United States.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Mark, and thank you to everyone who's joining us, listening in or watching this live. I'm very excited to be here to share with you the research that we did and some of the information that we discovered in exploring memories of expos in the past. So I'm going to show you a few slides. Let me just bring them up for you. All right, so I'm going to go through these slides. And first of all, I'm going to tell you about the project that we did before getting into some of the findings that we discovered, and then some of the overall lessons learned, both from people who attended expos hosted in the United States and also people who served as youth ambassadors representing the US abroad. So just to give you some background on the project that we did, we collected oral history interviews from September 2021 through January 2022. And the reason why we did oral history interviews is because these are in-depth, long-form interviews that allow the person to tell their story the way that they want to tell it. These are interviews designed to capture the person's life history so we can better understand who they are and how they approach their experiences and understand the world around them. So these interviews lasted anywhere from an hour to 2 hours long, and they were one-on-one with each individual. We interviewed 46 people total. We often call them narrators, but they're interviewees. I interviewed 30 people who experienced expos that were hosted in the United States between 1962 and 1984. So these included Seattle in 1962, New York City in 1964 and 65, San Antonio in 1968, and New Orleans in 1984, which was the last expo hosted in the United States, but hopefully not for long. And then my colleague, Maggie Lemire, interviewed 16 US citizens who represented the country at expos abroad in the USA Pavilion. And these were people from 2010 to 2017 in Shanghai, Yushu, Milan, and Astana. And through all of these interviews, we were really looking to find more information about their experiences. So something to complement all of the statistics we have about how many people visited, all of the interactions, but really trying to understand what were the felt experiences. How did the expos impact individuals who went there, who experienced them, who participated, and what do they remember of expos? What are the long-term impacts, both on the cities themselves, but also on individuals and communities? So first, I'm going to tell you about the expos hosted in the United States. And you can see these pictures are from some of the expos that I interviewed people about. And this gives you a sense of what these expos looked like, some of the footprints that they had in the cities. But these were very important because for the cities, a lot of people remembered the expos just sort of transforming certain neighborhoods in their cities. They revitalized some of the neighborhoods. In San Antonio, unfortunately, that included forced removal of an entire neighborhood, which the city is currently trying to reconcile or discuss in order to figure out how to move forward. But these were oftentimes new buildings and new infrastructure. Some of these buildings still exist today, whether they were designed to be or not. Some have become symbols of the cities. For example, Seattle Space Needle was built during the expo, and that has become the icon of the city. So these were very important structures, and people oftentimes talked about them as an investment in their cities, of a way of trying to not only show the city to the world and introduce the city to the world, but also of trying to invest in the city, make the city have improvements that the city needed in order to really celebrate the importance of those cities to the United States. In addition to that, people really thought about and remembered the way that they interacted with the international community that was drawn to these cities as the expos. People remembered walking into tents and feeling like they were in a completely different country, but really they were still just in the United States. But it was an opportunity for a lot of people who grew up in poor neighborhoods, who grew up with families that didn't have the ability to send them abroad, to be able to travel abroad. And so this was an opportunity to really travel abroad without having to leave the United States, that they could just hop on a subway or on a bus and go to the expo and feel like they were traveling the world. And that was really important to them. And they were able to have person-to-person interactions and talk to people from different countries. And for a lot of people, they commented on how this interaction and those experiences made them less scared of difference, that it made difference less scary, that they suddenly understood and had confidence about interacting with people from around the world and from different cultures from them. Some people also remembered that they saw people from all sorts of different socioeconomic groups in their cities coming to these expos. So it was an opportunity for people to have similar experiences with individuals and communities in their city who they never really interacted with on a daily basis. And so it was important to bring the entire city together, people from across the city together. And some of that took a lot of effort because at first some communities felt like the expo was not built for them, that it was not meant to be an entertainment or educational experience for them. And so the expos had to do additional outreach and try and incorporate them and make them feel welcome and celebrated to come to the expos. In addition to this, a lot of people saw the expos as a way to engage with new technology and revolutionary technology of the times. And so some people really saw the expo as introducing them to the culture of technology, that this was the first time they understood that technology didn't just happen, that it was a community of scientists and innovators who had their own cultures and own ways of doing things and own traditions. And that was something that they wanted to explore more. So for many people who either went to the expos or worked at expos as summer jobs, this was an opportunity for them to explore different possibilities. And for many people, it advanced their careers or it encouraged them to explore different careers that maybe they hadn't thought about before. For more people, it also encouraged them to travel abroad more throughout their lives. And so they really credited the expos with introducing them to the idea that they not only were Americans, but they were part of this global community and they could travel around and interact with and experience a whole bunch of countries and communities and not feel like people were so different. That everything was so foreign, that they could find some similarities and communicate with people in whatever way was possible. So next I'm going to talk a little bit about experiences with expos overseas. So youth ambassadors, they typically were college aged and they went to expos abroad to represent the US in other countries. And many of these students they were attracted to these programs because it was an opportunity to go abroad. It was an opportunity to have some very meaningful engagement in another country and get to know that country. For some people, that country also was where some of their ancestors were from. And so for some of these students, the expos were an opportunity for them to really engage with and understand some of their own cultures in different ways, and it allowed them to further understand or develop their own sense of identity and who they were and how that fit into their understanding of themselves as Americans. They also saw this as an important opportunity to confront some stereotypes that the world had about Americans in terms of what Americans could do, languages Americans spoke, who looked like an American or what an American looked like, this was an opportunity to really show the diversity and celebrate the diversity of the United States to the entire world. And they saw that as really valuable. And in addition, some youth ambassadors also talked about how this experience helped them have a more nuanced understanding of the United States as part of this global community, and a more nuanced understanding of international relations and diplomacy abroad, that before they had oftentimes seen some of these issues and debates in terms of black and white, but now they were starting to understand them in shades of gray and seeing those nuances of different perspectives and approaches to some of these conversations internationally. So this was very important for a lot of people and shaped a lot of the youth ambassadors' lives and their careers, and whether or not they chose to travel again, and helped them have that confidence and ability to go abroad some more. So some of the overall findings that we that emerged from this study is that a lot of the people we interviewed agreed that the US should continue to participate in expos, but that the focus should be on a more robust and reimagined way that capitalize on what the interviewees saw as the greatest soft power assets. And they identified these as the values of our country, innovations coming from the country, and the people and the diversity, that they really wanted it to not be just a display of companies and corporations and technologies, but really to have the opportunity to have person-to-person contact and be able to share ideas and explore technology with each other, not just having them on display, having things two-dimensional, but really having those conversations of getting to see different cultural performances and understand what made them important and valuable and where these traditions came from. That all of these were the most meaningful things that people remembered years and years after participating in an expo. In addition, they thought the government should really support expos. And part of this is showing or presenting the country as a whole abroad, but also in the United States, of seeing it as an opportunity to invest in cities, to invest in helping to address economic injustices, social injustices, through bringing some tourism and new infrastructure and building into cities, and having more of an idea of sustainability through building the expos, rather than having it just built and not used again, or the design not fitting with the local cities or with local communities, of really making sure that these two things meshed well together. But overall, everyone agreed that US participation in expos mattered. And a lot of people really, really emphasized in wanting to bring expos back to the United States, because they saw it as an opportunity to bring the world to the United States, to introduce different ideas and cultures and backgrounds to people in their cities, but also to show the vibrancy of American cities and the fullness of American lives in these cities, and also to have a platform where people from around the globe could come together and talk about some of the critical issues that everyone is facing, and to see the different ways in which people are approaching some of these issues, like poverty, climate change, racial injustices, that they saw the expo as being a place of collaboration, and really want the United States to be part of that and to support that moving forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mark so that we can hear more about more recent experiences with expos.
Thank you so much, Anna. And thank you for bringing out that perspective. You know, for many, many years, the US didn't participate. There was opposition in Congress and in our executive branch. I mean, it was a very difficult problem that Minnesota tackled. And thanks to excellent leadership from both parties, Congressman Emmer and Congresswoman Betty McCollum on the House side, and Senator Klobuchar and Senator Cornyn on the Senate side, really turned around that official opposition, that official real, negative attitude. And I'm so glad that those who participated and who had direct experience had such a positive story and were urging this new direction. I think Minnesotans are proud of the fact that we were able to reverse a policy that seemed to be pretty stuck. And so we're glad that we're in the mainstream on this kind of thing. So thank you for bringing that message, and we'll be back to you as part of the panel. As Anna mentioned, we're going to now move forward, and we're going to talk a bit about the Dubai Expo, which just completed. Minnesota had a big presence there when part of the US Pavilion, and we had Minnesota Day, we had Minnesota Week, all kinds of stuff. And the expos going forward. We know we have Osaka coming up soon, and our Congressman Dean Phillips did a really fine job getting added an appropriations to help cover the cost of the pavilion there, and Senator Klobuchar over on the other side help keep that alive. But we're going to hear from one of the people who really is at the center of this in our government, in our State Department. We're going to have an opportunity to talk to the person or one of the people who's really at the heart of making this possible. Our Foreign Service Officer, Pahajian, is a 30-year Foreign Service leader in the United States Department of State. But since 2019, he's had a very special assignment serving as a senior advisor in the Office of International Expositions in the Office of Undersecretary of Public Diplomacy. Sometimes we say that's the Expo unit at the US State Department. He's had assignments and consular positions and economic affairs positions all over the planet, in Costa Rica. He was at the Astana at Kazakhstan at the World Expo that was there. Some of you remember that. His focus is on the United States participation using its power in public diplomacy. And we're beginning to see an appreciation of the opportunities, but those opportunities can only be taken place when public servants like Anthony make it happen. Want to welcome you to the panel and thank you for your service to our nation and for all you're doing to help lift up expos into the US consciousness and to our national policy.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. You're very kind. I also want to thank Carolina and Tim, Anna, for all the great research, and Global Minnesota, because as we were waiting to get on this call, we saw so many people, so many of the sponsors and others that are involved in helping support this. And there's nothing more important. And thank you for anyone who's joined us today, for all of you. I'm going to spend a little bit of time. It is a slideshow, and Carolina, if you want to put that on, because I'm not as good looking as Mark nor Anna, so I'm better off with my slide presentation there. And so let's see if we're going to get that started. I can try to share mine, but I think we had said we would.
Now it's up.
Yeah. Okay. All right, there we go. So we can skip right through this one, and I'll try to make it as quick as we can so we can get, I think the most exciting part of this is the questions. And we do have one of our youth ambassadors here who has seen all of this one too many times, and she can laugh at the mistakes I make. But there's also a video at the end of this. It's like 2 minutes long that will summarize some of these. So I'm not going to go through everything that's written, but basically, just to describe the pictures, that's the front of our building at night. And the other photo is what was our exhibit 4, but basically it was one place where people stopped and sort of had an ongoing show. that planet would, the planet Earth would come up and down, an astronaut would drop down, a satellite would go by. So you have to remember that there are a lot of different people that come to an expo. There are some, every country has a national day, so they bring a high-level delegation, many prime ministers, royals, all kinds of folks are coming through. And so the US wants to deal with those important people because there's a bilateral component of our relations with them. There's a business component where many people, we as a State Department, we use these expos to address all these different audiences. But part of the the administration's policy, and really this has been in my 34 years at the State Department, you would have seen that this is one thing that doesn't change, and that is to promote trade, because both for prosperity back home, but also for just getting more exposure to people, to all of our innovative products. So that's part of it. And then the vast majority of our audience is the family of four that came to sort of get a Disney experience. And they actually got the Disney princesses at our pavilion for a couple days there. But the idea is that this was not only an educational kind of presentation, but one that has to entertain, because people had 192 choices of pavilions to go to in Dubai. So we try to make it educational, and you can also see we try to bring things in that, there's a list of some of the artifacts, a moon rock, a Martian meteorite. Interestingly, Thomas Jefferson's Quran, it's the first time it left the United States since he got it, and it was on display, and obviously because of the region, it was an important thing. And let's go ahead and switch over to the next slide. Because I just finished telling you about the artifacts that we packed into the pavilion, but no matter what high-tech stuff we put in, moving sidewalks, shows, technology, the number one thing that people remember about our pavilion and that they comment on, and it's always positive, are our youth ambassadors. Addie, I'd like you to close your ears so you don't get too swell-headed here. But I just want to, you see some of the statistics. Again, these 75 youth ambassadors came from 37 states, but they actually were recruited from, I was going to say all 50 states, but we got applicants from most of our territories and 49 states. For some reason, nobody from West Virginia applied. I consider that a failure on our part that we didn't advertise well enough. I live in Washington, D.C. I could have gotten a car and taken some posters, old-fashioned style, and tacked them up on a telephone pole or something. We will correct that next time around. But just to tell you, it was a nationwide search for this amazing group of people. And they spoke a lot of different languages. We had the luxury in Dubai, because it's such a large expat community there. Only 10% of the people that live in the UAE are actually Emiratis. And so we were able to sort of showcase the languages that Americans speak and really sort of tackle one of the, I forgot the word for it right now, but one of the examples, people always say, oh, Americans don't speak languages. Well, actually, we're from all over the world now, and we speak just about everything. And anyway, so they're just fantastic. I probably had one of the best jobs ever during COVID. I got to interview so many of these young folks, and when they gathered together there, as you can see the photo in Washington, essentially, I was heard saying that if one of these group got elected president, they would know where to get their cabinet from, because they had a future farmer of America. They've got rocket scientists, literally, engineers, linguists, diplomats like Addie and others. So we really, super lucky. Let's go to the next slide. but you wouldn't know that I'm really crazy about the youth ambassadors, would you? So somebody made a slide for me of the youth ambassadors that actually came from Minnesota. Minnesota had, I would say, I can safely say the highest percentage of youth ambassadors of any state. By number, there were more from California, but a much larger population. So, and somebody, I guess Miles, who's in there, slipped in, but he's actually from Wisconsin. We had another guy named Rakan Alzarka, who's from Minnesota, but since I think he went to school somewhere else, they forgot to put him in. But again, amazing people, and you'll meet at least one of them to speak today, and I hope some of the others are actually maybe on as well. We can go to the next slide. It was very important to us to, both with the youth ambassadors and with the cultural programs, to really showcase the entire United States as best you can. Obviously, Mark was asking me earlier where my last name came from. It's of Armenian origin. And we did have some Armenian American applicants for the Youth Ambassador Corps, but they didn't happen to get it. And so we didn't represent the Armenian American community, but with 75, you can't cover everything, right? But we did really, with the cultural programs and the youth ambassadors, we had somebody from every state, or in many cases, many people. And they really represented different genres of music, of interests, of dance, of art, of speaking, of, we had some chefs who came and made some regional meals and things like that. What you're seeing here, again, I'm not going to go through all the stats. You can read some of those, but you're seeing a photograph of the University of Minnesota marching band, and they're playing in the Al Wasl Dome. It's sort of the ceremonial heart and center of the whole expo, and not everybody got to play there, but they did get that opportunity. And it's also the world's largest projection screen. The entire dome actually is a screen as well. So it was really the focal point of the expo, where a lot of the bigger entertainment happened. Alicia Keys was there, Christina Aguilera, the Harlem Globetrotters did a little thing there for us, as well as elsewhere on the campus. Let's skip right along. Okay, so here's more of bragging about Minnesota, but I'm going to skip right through this. Again, you've seen that, and I'll go very quickly through this one as well. But I mentioned that business programming is important to the United States, again, because we want to, again, it's what we call part of the State Department's attempt at, bringing prosperity to the United States, because we're funded by the taxpayer. So this is, trying to help business deals. And Anna and I were speaking to a group in Utah yesterday, and one of the this guy walked up to me and said, "I've been to a lot of trade shows, and the number one thing that you do at a trade show, it's not that you have a particular business deal, you develop trust and familiarity." And I really liked what he was saying, because it's hard for us to quantify. Sometimes somebody tried to do it here, 7 memorandums of understanding, between U.S. and UAE, United Arab Emirate partners. But there was a whole lot more exposure and exchange of cards and ideas and thoughts that came up, and that's really what happened. So Minnesota was one of the states that sent delegations out to the expo, and again, getting its brand out there. Let's move forward. And this is going to be a 2-minute video. I'll let it go.
I'm Clark. I'm here to welcome you to the S Pavilion. Come and see the American dream.
The USA Pavilion at Expo 2020 Dubai welcomed over 1.5 million visitors. For those 6 months, guests from around the world experienced our theme, of life, liberty, and the pursuit of the future, which celebrated the American people, ideas, and contributions that have changed and improved lives in the United States and around the world. Expo 2020 Dubai was one of the largest events of its kind ever to be held in the Middle East. The USA Pavilion provided a unique platform to share American culture, promote mutual understanding, engage global audiences, and support international business opportunities.
The United States greatly appreciates the UAE's commitment to a successful, inclusive, safe, and healthy Expo for everyone.
The USA Pavilion at Expo 2020 allowed us to share our American history, to promote mutual understanding, and to highlight our commitment to a rules-based international system. Thank you for joining us on our World's Fair journey, life, liberty, and the pursuit of the future.
Okay, I'm going to finish with a couple more things. I think Mark mentioned that expos have always been about showcasing innovation from the very beginning, and there's no country more innovative than the United States. We've got ideas from all over the world that are homegrown and developed here, and so our struggle to join the expo movement has been difficult because ever since the Cold War ended, so did US government funding for expos stopped there. And the office that I'm now working in has been sort of reconstituted so that we can begin to do this work again. And we're very grateful for all the work that Minnesota is doing and the Minnesotan elected officials. I'm going to skip this slide because this is something I understand Mark is going to address. I'll just say that we're now, despite all the politicians' efforts, not everything has come together financially yet for Osaka, but we believe the president was just there in Japan. So I'm sure this topic came up. The next expos are every 5 years, from the large expos, and then the smaller expos, which are focused on an important theme, are in between those 5 years. So this expo that just finished was really Expo 2020. They kept the branding even though it was delayed by a year because of COVID, and then it went in the winter months from 2021 into 2022, because you really don't want to have an expo in the summer in the United Arab Emirates, where I was there in August and it was 140 degrees, and that's very hot. So so here we are in 2022 and only 3 years away from the next expo. And by this fall, we have to have a contract to have designed our pavilion and start construction and everything else. So a lot of work to be done. We're really excited because we learned a lot from this previous expo, where we were probably as well funded as we've ever been in terms of being able to do all the things we wanted to do. And I'll leave it there. Mark, I think you're going to talk more about Minnesota. If you want me to, then we'll get to it later. But other than that, thank you so much and look forward to any questions.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for all your work to inspire us and then to make that pavilion come to life. And we're down the road towards Osaka. Excellent having your president there talking, and I'm assuming also Secretary of State. And so this fast approaching next big World Expo in Osaka has been important for Minnesota also because we have been building close relations between our Expo effort here and the Expo effort in Dubai and the Expo effort in Osaka. Partly we're exchanging information about how do we have safe expos now that we really know more about pandemics. Japan has had experience in a long postponement with the Olympics, so they're quite self-conscious about this. But the more important thing is that we've begun to see that there's an expo movement. And as the US has re-engaged, and I have to say the first time I met with Expo leaders, so about a little over a decade ago in Paris, the former Secretary General said one of his legacies that he was hoping to have when he left that position, retired, was to have the United States to rejoin, to have the largest economy and one of the biggest nations on the planet not part of the movement was a huge missing piece. And I'm really proud of the effort, and the BIE and the larger institutions that watch over this also understand Minnesota's role. But now we're in this next phase where, in addition to working to make sure we have very good funding for our presence in Osaka, so that's coming up 2025, 2030 will be determined where that will be held sometime around November of this year. So we have to be thinking long term, but we're also working hard to bring an expo to Minnesota. And we know this is important in the bigger picture of bringing the expo idea back to life in the United States. It's important to remember that there was basically no discussion until a young man who had been a student ambassador for the country of Venezuela at the expo in Seville, Spain. He was 16 and 17 years old, and he fell in love with expos, and then he fell in love with the United States and moved to Houston. And it was his voice that first was lifted up in the Wall Street Journal, in fact, that got the rest of us around the country motivated to start pushing and start lifting up the idea that we were missing out by not being part of this expo movement. And we've seen that reflected in the oral histories that Anna shared with us to begin with. But it took a lot of time to get the pieces in place for our national coming together. And I have to say, it was some of those individuals who had been touched by expos who really had some of the most powerful voices. Our expo bid, our presentation that we put together in the books to go to Commerce Department and to the folks in Paris, were opened by letters from two of our most prominent leaders. And one of them, Senator Rudy Boschwitz, who was our senior senator for many years, tells a very, very moving story in his written letter of introduction, saying he had been fled with his family, had to flee Hitler from a Jewish Polish community that was German speaking right on the border. They fled to the United States, who welcomed them in. But he felt kind of lost. He describes, who am I? I'm from a little village. I'm in New York City. What's going on? But it was going out to the World's Fair 1939 there on Long Island, where he first saw like what this world was about and maybe what his place might be. And he said it was a transformative experience. And he actually had heard that we were talking of helping to bring the World's Fair back to the US. And he called me and said, I want to tell you my story. And his story was so powerful, we put it as the opening to our bid. And I think that story resonates with those of us who went or who have taken our children, went as children or took our children. These exciting, forward-thinking, forward-looking, forward-inspiring World Expos are transformative in terms of relations among people, for sure, but they're also inspiring for our young people and for those who come behind us, which is why it's so important, the State Department's success in lifting this into a higher stratosphere inside of our own government, but inside of the broader community as well. And so we have a year or so before there will be a vote on our expo. I'm not going to take the time tonight to go into deep depth, but I want to say that we're very fortunate to have Bob Clark, who everybody watching saw as he was our Commissioner General, is the name of the person with the overall responsibility for our pavilion, our representation at Dubai. And having Bob Clark now become one of the co-chairs here of our Minnesota bid helps to make the point that this is now a national bid. We'll probably still call it Minnesota's bid. We'll probably keep that Minnesota energy and that Minnesota perspective, but this is the bid of the United States. And the slide that Anthony shared, President Biden now was the third president to affirm Minnesota's bid. First President Obama, then President Trump, then President Biden. And we are the national bid for our entire country. And we'll be talking more about that as the year goes on. But we have a very special guest, our own Addie Cross, who was one of those student ambassadors. You will have an opportunity, if you'd like to go to the Global Minnesota blog and read her beautiful words about the experience. But we're joined by Addie tonight, who's calling from the middle of the night in Europe. Thank you, Addie, and turning the microphone over to you.
Hi, good evening. Thanks so much, Mark, and thank you, Global Minnesota, for inviting me to share about my experience as a youth ambassador, a Minnesota youth ambassador, as I like to call myself, from Expo 2020 Dubai. It's really an honor to be presenting next to Dr. Kaplan and Anthony from the State Department. And so I just hope to give you a more personal perspective of how I found out about the opportunity to be a youth ambassador, and then what it was actually like to be a youth ambassador at Expo 2020. And I also have a slideshow of some pictures that I took while serving as a youth ambassador in Dubai. So this experience impacted me in many ways. First of all, I found out what an expo was. As Dr. Kaplan could also share, many youth ambassadors don't know or aren't aware that World Expos are still going on before they find out about the job opportunity. This was the case with me. I thought that World's fairs were kind of obsolete, but I just found out through a Facebook post from one of my professors at St. Catherine University that they were hiring youth ambassadors and that I was eligible to apply. And so it was November 2020, and it was the middle of really pretty strict lockdown, and I didn't have a lot going on. And so I decided to apply, and much to my surprise, I was offered the job. And it really ended up having a big impact on my life. Being a youth ambassador personally really increased my confidence in public speaking. I was representing the U.S. I was at the U.S. Pavilion every day sharing about our different artifacts, which Anthony showed us in his slide presentation. I want to share that the Lunar Touchstone, that was a big deal. It was probably one of my favorite parts of the job, to tell people that they could come and touch a real piece of the moon. But that and other artifacts were things that I had to speak on, and I was able to gain a lot of confidence in expressing about those things. And then also really kind of diplomatically being able to discuss issues that are pertinent to the US and other countries, because guests at the US Pavilion wanted to engage in those types of topics. And so it was really rewarding to be able to do so. Through that, I confirmed my desire to be involved in public diplomacy in the future. And And I was also able to gain insight on a completely new region. I'd previously done work in Central America and really focused on Latin America. I'm really hoping to work in Latin America in the future. And so being in the UAE was a wonderful opportunity, a really once in a lifetime opportunity to learn about an entirely new region of the world. And then perhaps most importantly, this opportunity opened up the idea of expos to my friends, my family, and my home community. When I told my family that I was applying for this opportunity, they also didn't know what it was. They were a little bit apprehensive, but of course supportive. And so being able to share back about what the expo was, what the expo meant, being able to share my pictures and my experiences really opened up the idea of what a World Expo is to my home community in Minnesota. And now everyone in my community is really excited about the prospect of the expo, the specialized expo coming to Minnesota in 2027. So being a youth ambassador, it was kind of surprising because while I was working in the US Pavilion, the people that I would interact with, as I mentioned, really wanted to engage about world issues. And the US citizens, there were a decent amount of visitors from the US. A lot of them were surprised to see US citizens at the US Pavilion, which I found kind of baffling. People were really excited when they found out, oh, you're actually from the US. And people were also really eager to share about what state they were from. I found that this was a very specific, partially because of Global Minnesota and partially because of our bid to host the Expo in 2027, but also because of kind of that pride that people have for their home state. I ended up connecting with a lot of people based on the fact that they were also from Minnesota or their brother lived in Minnesota. And so that's why I do like to say that I'm a youth ambassador, but I'm a Minnesota youth ambassador. I found that I was constantly sharing this. And so this leads into why I'm really excited for the idea of Minnesota hosting the special expo in 2027. We had a wonderful group of youth ambassadors from Minnesota that really represented different communities from around the state. I have pictures later, but we had youth ambassadors from Minneapolis, St. Paul. I'm from a little bit farther north in Elk River. And then we had a youth ambassador who was born in Rochester as well. And so just kind of that diversity regionally and then also culturally that Minnesota has to offer really makes it a very strong location for our next expo, our next specialized expo. And so I do have some pictures to share with you about from my experience at the expo. Okay, so this was the uniform that we wore. This was the formal uniform that we were able to wear while working at the USA Pavilion. I have some other photos of the other uniform that we would wear, but it was red, white, and blue. It was surprisingly comfortable in the Dubai heat, but this is me on my first day on the side of the US Pavilion. And here's the US Pavilion on the right. Also at night, it really looked best at night, which is why both mine and Anthony's pictures of the pavilion were at night. But on the left, we have Al Wasl Dome, which, as Anthony shared, is the largest projection screen in the world. This is probably one of my favorite parts of the expo because at night, the screen would light up and there were shows. And so there were these benches that you could lay down on and watch these brilliant light shows. I've never seen anything like it in the world. I don't think I'll ever be able to adequately describe what that was like. And I'm probably going to be really annoying in the future, sharing that nostalgia with my friends and family. But this was such a beautiful aspect of Expo that really brought everyone together. And there were other aspects of Expo and living in Dubai that I really liked. The World Expo wasn't just the expo itself. This was involved in being to a new country and getting to know a new culture. And so this was the view from my window, the window of my apartment. I absolutely loved it. we ended up a group of us took the metro, the Dubai public transportation system, to the Expo campus every day. And some cultural things that I really liked about the UAE, one of them, maybe my favorite, was the fact that there was a metro car for women and children only. And so this was something new for me. I'd never experienced something like that culturally, but I thought that it was a really cool feature to have on the metro. And then here I am exploring some different pavilions. This is the Peru Pavilion, which is really beautiful on the outside. And the Morocco Pavilion was one of my favorites. It had a really wonderful interior. And so if you imagine, obviously I was spending as a youth ambassador most of my time in the US Pavilion working, but I had access to all of the other pavilions and also a lot of friends that were working at other pavilions. And so this was just such a global event and an opportunity to get to know other cultures. And here are the other Minnesota youth ambassadors. We're missing Stephanie, who left. We had two different groups of youth ambassadors come in. And so Stephanie wasn't here when we took this photo. But that's me. Laura is from Minneapolis, Rakan is from Rochester, and Belinda's from St. Paul. And then here's the other uniform that we got to wear, the short-sleeved casual uniform. It was really fun to wear a uniform that had a little bit of a flight attendant feel, but that had the red, white, and blue and the stars on it. Because when you were walking around Expo, everyone knew that you worked at the USA Pavilion. And then here's some pictures from around the UAE. So the Expo was hosted in Dubai, but that doesn't mean that I stayed at Expo or stayed in Dubai for the whole time. And so it was really rewarding to be able to explore around the entire country. And actually, I think that I went to every emirate in the UAE, if you count driving time. And then, as I mentioned, I think probably the most rewarding part of this experience was sharing Expo and the idea of Expo with my friends and family back home. And my parents were able to visit me. And so here are my parents outside of the US Pavilion. And it's really wonderful because they were able to visit me. It was a wonderful family experience. And then they went back to Elk River and they told all of their friends about Expo. And so now a whole community is excited about the idea of it coming to Minnesota. And this is one of the most rewarding. I know I said that my parents coming was the most rewarding, but maybe this is the second most rewarding, was just a group of international friends that I made at Expo. Here we have people from all different pavilions at a party that was organized at the US Pavilion through a language exchange program that I launched. And so it was just such a great way to get to know people from around the world that had similar ideals and that were really interested to engage with one another. And finally, here's the last picture of us. We had a lot of fun as youth ambassadors. And so this is just a group of us on shift. And I think that this really epitomizes some of the memories that I'll take away from Expo, is just being a really happy, fun, and wonderful experience and something that made me really proud. And so
fantastic.
Thanks, Mark.
And Addie, I have been recruiting you to help us do a whole webinar with some of the Minnesota youth ambassadors. So for all of you watching, watch for that, because it'll be exciting to hear those perspectives from all over. You know, we've covered a lot of ground here, and I'm noticing that there's a clock ticking. I want to give each of you a chance for some final comments and thoughts and things that you would like to share and underline one more time. Anna, can we start with you? There you are. And
Yes.
Thank you again.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you, Addie, for sharing your experiences. I feel like a lot of what you said resonated with what a lot of the people we interviewed said. So it's nice to see that some of those same benefits are still being carried through even to present expos, which is fantastic. Yeah, so I would just, I think, sum it up by saying that for many of our narrators, the expos were a unique opportunity, that it was very much focused around culture and exploration, as well as technology, and thinking about, again, sort of the culture of technology. But that this was a unique opportunity for many people, that it's something that is not necessarily provided in other experiences in the world, that the Olympics are an analogy that a lot of people give, but that's focused around sports and athletics and not necessarily around culture and understanding the way that these expos are. And so for a lot of the people we interviewed, this was something that they really cherished and valued, and that they wanted the United States as a whole, not just cities by themselves, to really invest in and make an opportunity for more people to engage in, and to continue to have those benefits and see them spread throughout the country and throughout the world.
Great. Thank you, Anna. Thank you again. Anthony.
I want to get to the questions, so I'll just say that a lot of what an expo means, or what it does, whether it's culture, innovation, showcasing those great American qualities, it does what Global Minnesota does, which is really reach out and touch the world and bring the world back home. And so as a result of that, I think, again, I want to thank you guys for everything that you're doing, because you're living an expo in a sense by reaching out to the world and bringing them home. And this is just a giant thing. Just to let you know, the State Department can walk and chew gum at the same time. Usually we can't do either, even alone. But while we work on the Expo 2025, because there's some big deadlines, I, for example, have been other than trying to clean up a few other things from Dubai and other projects, the main focus of what I'm going to do for the next year is work with, Mark, with Global Minnesota, with the Minnesota Bid Committee, everybody, to focus on bringing that expo home to Minnesota, so that we won't have to call it the World's Fair anymore, to help people understand in America what an expo is, and to start being able to call it an expo. We're going to bring it home. It will be 43 years since New Orleans, if Minnesota gets it. And it is a national bid, and the theme is absolutely on the money, in the perfect location. So looking forward to seeing if there are any questions.
Makes us happy. Addie.
I would just say that I'm excited for Expo to come to Minnesota.
So Anthony can be reached at the State Department. Anna's paper is fantastic, and we're going to make sure that that's up there, also easy for people to get a hold of. Addie's blog is up on the Global Minnesota blog, but we have the opportunity to hear more questions, which we can pass along to you, but also to generate more activity and more interest by having more of these webinars. And one of our ones that we're planning is with more of the youth ambassadors, but there's a lot more to talk about. I'm taken by the way that we're all wanting this experience, this exciting, inspiring experience, to be shared by more people. And I find myself in that category of, like with Senator Boschwitz, having been really impacted by this as a kid. And I do think the emotional, inspirational, hopeful part is really important at all times in history, but especially now. And I want to recognize, Addie, that you were there in the beginning of this war that's now taking place in Ukraine, and that while you were there were wars taking place all over, and people there were trying to build a future, a peaceful, harmonious, sustainable, resilient, inclusive, equitable future. And that's kind of the promise of Expo, that everyone who spoke tonight spoke to that best of our angels that we have, the Expo movement being one of the vehicles for Thank you so much to all of you. We look forward to having you back on the program here at Global Minnesota. And for all of you watching, this is going to be up in our archive. So bring your family and friends over for Friday night pizza or fish and watch it again. And let us know how you want to help to make sure that we have a strong representation of Osaka, and we bring all of Elk River down with Addie to be ribbon cutters when we open Expo 2027 in just a few years. Good evening, good morning, good day, wherever you are, and thank you again for joining Global Minnesota on our special program about expos yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Goodbye now.